Long before the first cowboy lit up a hand-rolled joint behind a barn, cannabis was already making its rounds in the annals of human history. In fact, the earliest known puff dates all the way back to 2727 BCE in ancient China, where Emperor Shennong, sort of the godfather of Eastern herbal medicine, recommended cannabis for treating malaria, rheumatism, and for getting your imperial taxes. Over the next few millennia, the plant wandered west like a true drifter, popping up in Greek potions, Roman ointments, and Middle Eastern mysticism. By the time the Spanish stumbled into the Americas in the 16th century, armed with swords, crosses, and the deeply held belief that everything not nailed down belonged to them, cannabis had evolved into two very different plants, one for getting twisted, and one for twisting into rope. Guess which one the conquistadors brought? Hemp. Lots of it. Chile got the first cut in the Western Hemisphere, where the Spanish cultivated it mainly for fiber. Back then, nobody was smoking it for fun, unless you count monks giggling over their scratchy tunics. Fast forward to 1611, Jamestown, Virginia. The place was falling apart. Starvation, disease, and Englishmen who thought they could plant gold. Then came a royal command from King James I. Stop dying, start farming. And more specifically, grow hemp, peasants. Or something to that effect. By 1619, the Virginia Company made it mandatory. Every landowner had to plant at least 100 hemp plants, presumably to keep the crown in ship sails and hangman's rope. So yes, hemp was the first cash crop in America. Not tobacco, not cotton, weed rope. Even George Washington, yes, the powdered wigged guy on your dollar bill, was in on the action. His Mount Vernon estate had sprawling hemp fields. Letters from Old George reveal his interest in separating male from female plants, likely to maximize fiber yield, though some historians wonder if the father of the nation may have also been experimenting with the fun side of farming. Thomas Jefferson, not to be outdone, grew hemp too. Founding fathers? More like founding farmers. By the 18th and early 19th centuries, hemp was about as American as apple pie and smallpox. It clothed the poor, rigged the ships, and held up the trousers of every self-respecting frontiersman. By 1775, Kentucky had jumped on the hemp bandwagon, quickly followed by Mississippi, Georgia, California, South Carolina, and Nebraska. If there was sunlight and land to till, somebody was growing hemp on it. But cannabis wasn't just about rope and rugged pants. By the mid-1800s, it found its way back to its medicinal roots, only this time via Western medicine. Enter William O'Shaughnessy, an Irish doctor stationed in British India. In 1839, he began introducing cannabis extracts to treat muscle spasms, rheumatism, and various Victorian-era afflictions like nerves and fainting couches. The plant entered American pharmacies not long after, labeled as a wonder cure for everything from migraines to menstrual cramps. And for a brief moment in medical history, cannabis was queen. That is, until aspirin showed up and took her throne. Still, cannabis was sold in tinctures, pills, and even syrups. No fancy labels, just instructions like, shake well. May cause mild euphoria or sudden transcendental insight. Consult a spirit guide if symptoms persist. But as cannabis crept its way into mainstream medicine, something else began to happen. Something uniquely American: regulation. Now, if there's one thing America loves almost as much as banning things, it's labeling them first. Starting in the mid-1800s, states began dabbling in what they called poison laws, a charming legal catch-all for anything that might kill you or make you think you could fly. Opium, arsenic, belladonna, and yes, eventually cannabis. New York took an early lead. In 1860, legislators, clearly inspired by a recent uptick in public freakouts, declared that cannabis, when sold without a written doctor's order, would henceforth be treated like poison. Literally, all products had to carry bright red poison labels, even if they were just hemp tinctures for back pain. Other states followed suit in a half-hearted game of ban it, but not too hard. Wisconsin and Louisiana required prescriptions. Nebraska and others skipped the prescription part, but insisted you list what the drug was for and who was buying it, because nothing says discreet pain relief like writing your insomnia on a pharmacy ledger for all to see. California, on the other hand, couldn't make up its mind. In 1880, they tried banning all hemp-based narcotics in a bill alongside opium. Then they backtracked and only outlawed opium. Then they reintroduced a new version. And then they forgot about it altogether because San Francisco was too busy burning down again. Meanwhile, in the vast and unruly lands between the Mississippi River and the Pacific Ocean, nobody gave a single legal damn. There were no cannabis laws, because there were barely any laws at all. These were the territories, not yet states. If you had land and grit, you could grow whatever you wanted, and many did. Cannabis, ever the opportunist, loved disturbed soil and cleared fields. It grew fast, spread its pollen wide, and took root anywhere humans had whacked down enough trees to grow a dream. The American frontier, barely tamed, dusty, and desperate, was a 5-star hotel for marijuana. And so it flourished. Cannabis grew wild across Kansas. It sprouted along trails in Nebraska. It popped up near creeks in Oklahoma and between fence posts in Colorado. It required no pampering, no fertilizer, and almost no water. It was the perfect plant for poor folks with no time for fuss. And soon enough, it stopped being just medicine. It became something more recreational. Enter the cannabis cowboy. Forget Clint Eastwood and the Marlboro Man. If you want to talk about frontier legends with a taste for the green stuff, you need to start in Texas. After the Mexican-American War ended in 1848, the U.S. snagged about half of Mexico's land, and with it, a whole lot of displaced Mexicans. Many settled in Texas, bringing with them a plant they called marijuana, a name that sounded a little exotic, a little dangerous, and exactly like something the American press would later weaponize. At this point, cannabis wasn't yet the poster plant for cultural collapse. It was simply a smoke. Cheap, accessible, and potent. Among migrant laborers, especially Mexicans and African Americans, it became a tool for relaxation after brutal days of field work or cattle drives. These men were the real deal, tough, sunburned, and saddle-worn. They didn't smoke for show, they smoked to stay sane. The cannabis cowboy wasn't just a gimmick. He was a man on the fringe, part outlaw, part laborer, part cultural bridge. He rolled his own cigarettes, usually with tobacco and wild-grown weed, and passed the time watching prairie winds and waiting for the next roundup. The high dulled the pain in his joints and quieted the ghosts in his head. Cannabis never took off with the same fury as alcohol or opium. It remained mostly confined to the margins. But it was there, smoked by those with little else, shared in camps, whispered about in town, tolerated, ignored, or, in some cases, quietly encouraged by ranch owners who knew a mellow cowboy was a manageable one. And while settlers in Boston pharmacies still saw cannabis as something you rubbed on a toothache, the Wild West was discovering something else. You could smoke it, laugh, forget, and float above the dirt for a while. If you've ever heard the folk song La Cucaracha, you might think it's just a quirky tune about a cockroach who can't walk. But in reality, that bug had nothing to do with pest control, and everything to do with Pancho Villa's army, and weed. Yep. La Cucaracha ya no puede caminar wasn't about roaches losing their legs, it was about soldiers running out of marijuana. The full, unabridged version of the song, sung across dusty camps and campfires in the early 20th century, included lines that translated roughly to, "The cockroach can't walk because she lacks marijuana to smoke." Subtle, right? Francisco Pancho Villa, outlaw, folk hero, general, and full-time chaos machine, was many things. But according to oral traditions passed down in Mexican corridos, folk ballads, he was also a connoisseur of cannabis. His troops, known as Los Dorados, the Golden Ones, were known not only for their courage, but for their pre-battle blunts. For many of these men, especially the Yaqui natives fighting under Villa, marijuana wasn't just recreation. It was ritual, a way to calm the nerves before bullets flew. Villa's band of rebels smoked freely, often alongside mezcal and sotol, desert spirits that could strip paint and dignity in equal measure. Together, these highs became part of the revolutionary cocktail, fueling raids, camaraderie, and just enough recklessness to charge into impossible fights, with nothing but mules and mustaches. Now, Pancho himself didn't need weed to be unpredictable. Born Doroteo Arango, he'd grown up poor, angry, and exceptionally good at taking other people's horses. After his daughter died and a local landowner insulted his family, Villa ditched the bandit life briefly and joined the revolution. Initially, it was about revenge. Then it became something bigger, especially after he met Francisco Madero, a wealthy idealist who preached land reform and justice. Villa didn't know much about politics, but he knew a good cause when he saw one. As his legend grew, so did his habit for cannabis. During his short-lived rule over Chihuahua and Ciudad Juarez, he taxed the rich, legalized vice, and spent his evenings soaking in champagne and hashish. He imported fine clothes, rode in American cars, and smoked whatever he damn well pleased. If anyone deserved the title of cannabis cowboy, it was Villa, half Robin Hood, half Willie Nelson with a rifle. But of course, it couldn't last. After a string of victories, Pancho Villa's revolutionary dream ran into the steel wall of betrayal. When Venustiano Carranza, an old rival backed by the United States, took power, Villa's funding and support crumbled. Feeling cornered and vengeful, Villa did something no one expected. He crossed the U.S. border and raided Columbus, New Mexico in 1916. It was the last foreign military attack on U.S. soil until Pearl Harbor. Washington, never one to ignore an ego bruise, responded with fury. President Woodrow Wilson sent General John J. Blackjack Pershing, armed with 10,000 soldiers, motor vehicles, and aircraft, into Mexico to hunt down one man with a thick mustache and a saddlebag full of weed. They never caught him. Villa slipped through mountains and into legends, while Pershing's campaign floundered in the desert heat. But the raid marked a turning point, not just in military affairs, but in how America viewed the plant Pancho Villa and his Dorados loved so much. Suddenly, cannabis wasn't just some folk medicine or cowboy cigarette. It was Mexican, it was foreign, it was revolutionary, and it was about to be demonized. By the early 20th century, America was in transition. The Wild West had been paved over, fenced off, and photographed. The frontier was closed. States had borders, towns had laws. And former cowboys were now mayors, merchants, or just old men grumbling on porches about how the prairie used to be lawless and full of character. Cannabis, however, didn't fade away quietly. It lingered. It lingered in jazz clubs, on border farms, in Mexican labor camps, and under the radar of a country that was starting to see narcotics as the boogeyman behind every broken window and broken rule. And then came the rebrand. See, for most of the 1800s, people in the US called the plant cannabis. It was medicinal, it was respectable, it was something you bought in a pharmacy, not a back alley. But now, in the early 1900s, newspapers and moral crusaders started using a different word: marijuana. With a J, exotic, foreign, sinister. It wasn't just a new name, it was a marketing strategy for fear. Articles started cropping up in places like the Los Angeles Times. Breathless headlines warned of reefer madness, of Mexican immigrants under the influence, running wild, corrupting youth, dancing too close to jazz, and, God forbid, laughing at authority. It wasn't just racist, it was ridiculous, but it worked. By 1936, every state had some kind of restriction on cannabis. And in 1937, Congress passed the Marijuana Tax Act, effectively outlawing it nationwide. The law was championed by Harry Anslinger, America's first drug czar, who described marijuana as a gateway to insanity, murder, and jazz, which, depending on your weekend plans, might sound either horrifying or amazing. Anslinger's congressional testimony included tales of cannabis users leaping out of windows, committing random acts of violence, and becoming irredeemably Mexican. No actual evidence, of course, but evidence wasn't the point. Fear was. He wasn't alone. A California pharmacy board member named Henry J. Finger testified that cannabis was spreading among undesirable populations, red immigrants, and needed to be stopped before it took over decent society. You know, the kind that owned top hats and segregated water fountains. Meanwhile, few people bothered to ask actual cannabis users what they thought. Or say, look at any of the scientific studies coming out of Britain or India that suggested cannabis was less dangerous than whiskey and far less addictive than opium. Nope. The tide had turned, and cannabis, once used by George Washington, Pancho Villa, and half the cowboys in Kansas, was now legally treated the same as heroin. The irony? Mexico had already outlawed marijuana in 1920, so much for the whole blame the border narrative. But the damage was done. For decades, cannabis disappeared from American shelves, fields, and conversations. What had once been grown by pioneers, smoked by laborers, and celebrated in folk songs was now locked behind bars, along with the people who still dared to use it. For a while, cannabis went quiet, silenced not by science, but by stigma. From the late 1930s through the 1950s, the plant vanished from the mainstream. It still grew in ditches across Kansas and flourished in forgotten corners of the Southwest, but its role had shifted from folk remedy to felony. But cannabis is nothing if not patient. Like a tumbleweed waiting for wind, it bided its time. Then came the 1960s. If the Wild West was about open land, revolvers, and survival, the 1960s were about open minds, rock music, and questioning authority. The generation that grew up watching cowboys on TV started dressing like them. If cowboys had long hair, no jobs, and guitars. And suddenly, cannabis was back. Not as medicine, not as fiber, but as rebellion in a rolled-up leaf. College campuses lit up with activism and joints. Protesters against the Vietnam War puffed reefer in public parks, often draped in patchwork denim and idealism. Weed became a symbol of nonconformity, a middle finger to the establishment. It didn't matter if your dad thought marijuana turned you into a communist. It made you feel like a free thinker. By 1970, cannabis was officially illegal for all purposes, thanks to the Controlled Substances Act. This shiny new legislation declared marijuana a Schedule I drug, on par with heroin and LSD. Never mind that nobody had ever overdosed on pot. That wasn't the point. The point was control. The very next year, President Nixon launched the War on Drugs, a name so dramatic it might as well have come with theme music. And while cannabis wasn't the deadliest drug in the mix, it became a symbol, an easy target, a political scapegoat. And yet, it didn't go away. It was part protest, part pleasure, part plant. And by the 1990s, something unexpected happened. Science caught up. Modern era, legalization, and legacy. By the 1990s, America's relationship with cannabis had reached an awkward standoff. It was still illegal, federally, emphatically, and in bold capital letters. But millions were using it anyway. Cancer patients, veterans, grandmas with glaucoma, people who weren't trying to rebel or rage against the machine. They just wanted to sleep, eat, or stop hurting. Then, in 1996, the dam cracked. California passed Proposition 215, legalizing medical marijuana. For the first time in nearly 60 years, cannabis had a legal foothold. The floodgates opened, slowly but surely, one state at a time: Oregon, Alaska, Washington, then Colorado, which legalized recreational use in 2012 and promptly became a green gold rush. Dispensaries popped up like saloons in a boomtown. Edibles, tinctures, oils, weed came back wearing a lab coat, a logo, and an aroma of peppermint terpene fusion. By 2025, 24 states have legalized it fully. Another 14 have it for medical use only. And the rest? They're either dragging their boots or quietly pretending nobody smokes there. The cannabis of today doesn't look like the dusty roadside plants that once grew outside Dodge City. It's packaged, branded, taxed, and debated on Capitol Hill. You can buy it in biodegradable jars with names like Cactus Sunrise or Banana Sherbet Haze. There are cannabis sommeliers now, influencers, IPOs. But for all the slick modern marketing, something primal still lingers, something wild. Something that ties a vape pen in San Francisco to a cowboy in 1883 rolling a joint with calloused fingers behind a barn. The cannabis of the frontier wasn't about luxury. It was about getting through the day, about pain, exhaustion, grief, about stealing a quiet moment under a silent sky, with nothing but prairie winds and a few sweet puffs to remind you that you were still alive. So let's remember those cannabis cowboys. Not just the ones who smoked for fun, but the ones who worked until their hands split open, who rode until their bones ached, and who found, in a weed growing wild by the roadside, something close to peace. Pancho Villa, high as the Chihuahua Mountains. The unnamed ranch hand in Texas, lighting up beside his horse. The soldier, the outlaw, the farm wife, with her aching joints and her backyard tincture. Their stories were never told in textbooks, but the smoke still rises from their fires.